Hey, Julia Barzyk here from Wise Investigator. So, we are going to continue talking about collaborations with government scientists and engineers. And I'm going to talk now about how you can actually go about making these connections. Now, if you have not watched the first video on who are these people, or part two on the benefits of collaborations with these government scientists and engineers, go back and watch those. But let's get into how you are actually going to make these connections. So, this sounds, some of this is going to sound pretty basic. Okay. But I am going to have to cover it because I work with PIs who are struggling to do this and it's not happening and they're not thinking to do this. So forgive me here when I start with some basics. Okay. Doing a basic internet search. A lot of people don't do this, don't think to do this, don't want to take the time to do it, or don't have the patience to scroll through the results and really do that detective work to figure out what's going on. So, doing a basic internet search with the names of relevant laboratories and research topics, you can find web pages, you can find press releases, and which are on a web page, right? But it will be a description of a specific project or outcome. And you can also sometimes find technical reports, which will be PDFs where the results of maybe a multi-year effort, a team effort on a government lab project are presented, oftentimes with contact information or even the names of these people with details about their titles and where they're located. So let me just tell you about one example. And this is something that I looked up when I was preparing this information for my newsletter to give people an example of how you could go about getting this information. And so I wanted to start with something where I didn't know anybody, I didn't know about this topic, right? To just say like, okay, what can I find? So I searched for Oak Ridge National Laboratory Environmental Chemistry. And very quickly, I got to a web page for the Environmental Sciences Division, and more specifically, the Environmental Toxicology Laboratory. So this webpage mentioned several different research focus areas, and they also had a description of their facilities, which was really useful. So clicking through here, I could find that they actually state that they work with other agencies like the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy, and the Massachusetts Department of Natural Resources. So we don't know, in what capacity they're doing this. Are these customers? Are they doing customer-funded work? See my first video for explanation of that. Or what's the nature of these collaborations? We don't know, but we're already seeing ties to other government organizations, be it the other federal or in this case also a state government organization. Okay, so then they have a staff tab, tab, and there they have names, phone numbers, email addresses for over 150 employees. When you click on these employees, you get a bio of this person. So there you have already over, even if all of their bios are not complete or all of their contact information is not provided for all 150, it would be at least over 100 that you have that are somehow related to this topic. So if this is something in your research area, you're going to have to click on each one of these people and figure out, who makes sense for me to contact. When you find a person of interest here, you can look for their publications on Google Scholar, Google them. Are they, when you find their publications, if you find some, right, maybe not all have them, but do you notice that they're publishing with other academics? Who are their co-authors? What do you notice about their publications that's interesting to you or catches your attention in some way? So I will state that not every government website is going to provide this much information on individuals. This was a really good find, but this was the first finding that I made when I did this little exercise, right? So I did not select this out as a particularly strong example. It was literally the first thing that I came across. So absolutely, you can find this type of information. But, the Department of Defense websites generally don't list employees in the same way. But you can go to something like the Defense Technical Information Center. I have a video on how you use that site, also called DTIC, DTIC, and you can look for research find out what research has been supported by Department of Defense, including publications that were published by their own employees, and you can look for those names there and continue on the detective work process from there. So Also, now you have some names of people from a web search directly on the web page, from a DTIC type tool, or from a technical report, perhaps. Well, you can look for them on LinkedIn. Now, I will say that usually about half of the people you find of interest in the government will have a LinkedIn profile that's like relatively active. The other half will just not be on LinkedIn, or they have a profile that's not been used in 5 years. They're effectively not on LinkedIn. So already, 50% is pretty good. So send them a connection request. Now, this is why you want to have a LinkedIn profile that's up to a certain standard, because when they get that connection request and they can see who you are, you're a professor at an institution, locally, or even if it's across the country, it doesn't matter. And they see your research area. So, oh, okay, I'm in an environmental toxicology lab, and here's someone who's in environmental chemistry at a university on the other side of my state. They're contacting me to connect. Well, that makes perfect sense. You're in a related area of research, so of course you would send a connection request. So you could just send a connection request, or if you really think you want to reach that person soon for a conversation, then just send a little note. You can say something like, "Hey, Dr. So-and-so, I saw your recent paper on whatever," mention one of their recent papers that looked interesting. Wanted to reach out. Would you have time for a short call in the next couple weeks? And, see what they say. You can send them that as a DM on LinkedIn. They're not on LinkedIn. You can send them something like that with an email. You might want to use something like your recent paper on whatever in the subject of the email, because that's going to catch somebody's attention, right? They say, "Oh, somebody read what I did, what I published, and they want to talk about it with me." Yeah, that's an email they want to open, right? So now, if you've asked for a meeting and they agree to meet, then you want to have this initial meeting on the technical topic. This is going to be a technical conversation that you're the type of which you are very familiar with. So there's really nothing to be nervous about or really even prepare for. You are going to listen to their interests and you're going to talk to them about what you're doing. And if it does not seem like there's any synergy, it's a polite conversation and you can move on from there. But I have found that the vast majority of the time, these conversations really are fruitful. There's excitement and there is a connection on the technical topic. So once you start those conversations, that's going to take care of itself, because this is the stuff that you're excited about. The other party's excited about that too. So it will be a good conversation. Now, you want to not focus on, like worrying about like a path forward really at that stage of an initial conversation. You can have that conversation and move on from that. And then think about, let that process, think about what could there be opportunities? Might you be submitting a proposal to NSF or something in the future where you could mention a collaboration with these people, or involve them in some way? Maybe one of them would be appropriate to have a meeting with your student, or even maybe down the road serve on a committee for one of your students. Would it make sense to have a follow-up conversation? Would you want to invite them to campus to give a talk? Maybe they would want to have you on site to give a talk. So these are the kind of smaller steps that could make sense. Down the road, the opportunity for money could be discussed. How, if there's something you really want to do, you might have a conversation of, "Hey, how can we make this happen? We need funding to get a student, or we need funding to make this happen." But you don't need to have that conversation right at the outset. So another way that you can reach people is by asking your research office or other colleagues, if you know someone who does have a connection with that organization, you can ask them for help, saying, "Hey, I'm interested in working with someone at this national lab that, maybe there is someone in your university already working in a productive collaboration with someone there. And you could be introduced to someone who could point you to the correct person in terms of your technical area." So keep in mind asking existing colleagues or asking in your research office, because they have a view of many different collaborations and connections within the entire school, or whatever unit they're working within, and they may be able to point you to someone who can make that introduction for you. Okay, so that's another resource to keep in mind. Now, as a best practice, you also want to make sure that you're following these organizations on social media. You never know what research projects they're going to highlight there. Say, oh, look at our wonderful chemist who just had this result and got it published here or presented it at this conference, and there'll be a nice little write-up of that work. Well, that's a great opportunity, if that's relevant to what you do, to make a note. Oh, hey, this person's doing this work there. And I could perhaps send them a message and say, hey, I saw that, this press release, this news story about this work you're doing. I'm interested in learning more about it. Could we have a conversation? So by following their accounts on social media, you can be sure to see these little news pieces and other kinds of updates, give you information on what's going on at these organizations. So now, before I go through a little summary of these, because we kind of ran through a lot, I do want to point out that you really want to be thinking about how you can help the other person. So this is a very good way to go into these kinds of conversations. Really thinking, what resources do I have access to that I could share with this individual? Not naively, right? Not until it makes sense to share those resources, right? You're not going to send your student to work with someone that you don't even know, is a good mentor or colleague, right? You're going to develop these feelings, this understanding over time. So, okay, how could the relationship progress, and what might be appropriate for me to offer up in terms of support at what point in time, right? But going into the conversations thinking, how can I help this other person, is going to take you a lot further than going in and thinking purely, what can I get out of it? Okay, so just wanted to make that clear here. All right, so to wrap up this series on connecting and collaborating, I should say, with government scientists and engineers, I will give you a couple little bullets here that you can run through and think, okay, am I doing the detective work that I need to make these connections, to find these people and then make the connection? Okay, so big picture, web search for government labs, research keywords, using Google Scholar to find an individual's recent publications. Those can serve as a starting point for a conversation. Looking at resources like Defense Technical Information Center, looking up potential collaborators on LinkedIn, sending them a message, making sure that your LinkedIn page is up to date. Also, reviewing a prospect's recent publications when you have a call or a meeting, so that you can, mention anything that you find exciting there and show them that you did put a little bit of effort into learning about them, right? And keep in mind also that if there is, not a connection, or someone declines to meet with you, don't hesitate to ask them if they could refer you to someone who may be interested. Don't just let them get off without maybe asking for that one little piece of information. So also asking colleagues at your institution to refer you to government scientists and engineers. Follow the social media accounts of government laboratories, and always keep in mind, what is it that I can do to help this other person? All right, so I hope that this summary provides some context that I haven't really been able to find elsewhere on this very important topic. So check out the other videos if you haven't already, and check out my newsletter. I'm going to link to that below, because these are the kind of topics that I'm covering there. So if this is helpful to you, I have a lot of back issues, and I have this coming every week. So I will link to that, and check that out, and have a good one.